Well, today we're going to revisit AI. Not that enough hasn't been said somewhere, but every now and then you run across something that sounds like there's an extra edge that we haven't quite come to grips with. So, one of the things we are going to come back to is DeepSeek because it was a real catalyst in what happens with AI globally. Tariffs have had an impact on whether or not companies were going to continue spending beaucoup bucks to get the competitive edge.
Right.
And offsetting that commitment to capital, it turns out that most of the big behemoths in this arena had really strong earnings reports in the first quarter, which surprised many analysts and the market as a whole. And then we have the limitations of power grid. Where's the power going to come from? Because it's not going to come from green energy. And how do we get it to where it needs to be? Those are the big issues facing AI and the new generation of software that's going to answer your questions. It's not going to solve your problems, though some of it will. If it's math
They
problem,
try. Yeah,
they can do that.
absolutely they can. Who knows? Right. Right.
But so welcome to this podcast. I'm Don Creech.
And I'm Perry Sykes, and this is the Investor Resources Podcast.
So DeepSeek's introduction with just within months, basically, Perry, as we were talking before we started, you said
Yeah.
this was not a Chinese government innovation because
Correct.
communist regimes don't innovate; they dictate. They're not
Correct.
innovators, and we know China basically is a they rob intellectual property from wherever they can find it for their own advantage.
That's a fact, and it looks like from the beginning, it was DeepSeek. Looks like that's at least part what it was. A lot of DeepSeek was lifted directly from Chat GTP4, but it still was produced, like you said, Don, not by the Chinese government, but if we're to believe what we hear out of China, it's about 25 guys that were running a hedge fund that said we see a massive opportunity here, and there's no reason not to get on board. And we've got an idea that we can run a large language model much more efficiently and bypass a lot of the need for thousands of high-end NVIDIA chips and run this on a less robust computer network, but still get most of the results. And they managed to do that. So while it's not by any measure, it's not as good as Grok 3 or 4 or Chat GTP 4 or 4.5. It's not, but it's good enough to do the vast majority of functions that most users are looking for, and it's free. And so they're going to keep some market share, and it's going to keep growing. But the big thing is that you don't have to be on the absolute cutting edge of the technology to have a useful piece of software. And we in the U.S. we kind of lost track of that a little bit, and that everyone wanted to be the best, the fastest, the most productive, the deepest large language model out there. And it turns out for the vast majority of users, don't need that. You don't have to be at the cutting edge. You don't have to be the fastest, the largest. You don't need to be there. And they pointed that out, and that's a meaningful thing. That's why they got so much disruption going on. But that's kind of the message here. It's like a couple dozen guys that decide, hey, let's look at this a little differently, can literally disrupt an entire global process like AI and come in and just really shake things up overnight. Overnight, they came in and did that.
There and recent developments in terms of people looking at how people use it, how individuals use this as opposed to large corporations. And the large
Yes,
corporations have different needs than the typical small business operator or the individual investor or individual researcher. And in that situation, they're going to be okay with a lower level of accuracy. But it turns out with recent
correct.
research, which I just read this weekend, is that AI issues, when you challenge them because you think they made a mistake, will look at themselves internally to the software, large language process that they've been trained on, and say, Oh, yeah, perhaps you're right. Maybe we should look at it this way. And you can continue to challenge it. And what it will do is it will continue to modify its answers until it finds one that you are willing to accept.
Correct.
So it
That's
like
interesting.
large
It is.
language models are designed to research the database that they have for reference. And if you're a liberal and you don't like the answers, it will go find another answer that's more in line with your bias. If you're a conservative and don't like the answer, it'll do the same thing. If you challenge it, it's going to tune itself to your bias, which means that you must be constantly aware that whatever feedback you're getting out of your AI inquiry needs to be verified,
Correct.
which many attorneys have figured out was a critical mistake in preparing court cases, relying on AI, which invented court cases. And some
It did.
judges, some judge or their assistant figured out this was phony
Right.
baloney and not reliable uh, case accounts.
AI is not in set it and forget it mode yet. You cannot just get the results that it kicks back and say and say that that's fine. And it didn't used to refine its point of view based on your input, but they're dialing in higher and higher levels of what they call logic functions in the AI in the large language model. So instead of merely searching data and looking for, well, what does most of the data say? Like you said, Don, it will assume a bias and say, oh, okay, this is what we're looking for, something over in this area, and it will rethink what it's the output it's giving you. So you have to be very careful what you're doing, because if you're looking for absolute facts, it's pretty easy to find those. If you're looking for an opinion and a direction for, say, a business decision, what should I head into this widget or that widget, you can lead it a bit where you want to go, and you have to be very careful that you're not creating a feedback loop for yourself, and you're not getting honest data anymore. You're getting your own opinion back, and that can be that can be an issue that really needs to be dealt with, and that's going to be on an individual user basis right now, because the language models are still learning how to deal with us as a questioner.
Well, the issue that you raised with DeepSeek is as a catalyst in the industry is that it brought the concept of AI down to a much lower cost level, which
Yes.
scared investors in the technology arena, saying, well, if it's that cheap, how can we possibly justify these hundreds of millions of dollars in the new data processing centers and more
Right.
expensive, more advanced chips? But there's a paradox in investing, and actually, there's a paradox in data, and that is that, particularly in investing in technology, when things get cheaper, it actually makes investing easier, and companies commit more money to figure out how to use this instead of
Sure.
being an impediment to expanding the AI application. DeepSeek's cost cutting became a motivation to get more done because you don't have to spend as much money. And it spreads
Right.
out into other arenas that people don't necessarily take time to think about. One of which came up on a webinar that I was on this morning, which was Corning Glassworks. And you say,
Yeah.
well, what's Corning Glassworks have to do with AI? Well, they make fiber optic cable. And how do you communicate rapidly if you want data transmission? Use
Right.
fiber optics. You don't use copper wire. It's quicker and easier, and it's more efficient to lay than copper, which is kind of hard to process. Turning silicone into glass is an easier process. However, you want fiber optic. Corning's another way to get a more efficient use of that process, more refined use. One of the other
Sure.
areas is how you're going to get power. And I mentioned
That's
this
a
in
good
the
one.
lead
Yeah.
on, and
Yeah.
that is green energy is not going to be the source of power for these data centers, because as the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal learned last week, green
Right.
energy is not reliable when there's weather disruptions. And the entire country was shut down. Both countries, the entire electric grid was shut down. And of course, there'll be an investigation to figure out what the problem was, but it's undoubtedly not going to turn around and look at social policies being the problem. They're going to
Correct.
going to look for
Correct.
some glitch
It'll
in
be
the,
something else. Yeah, yeah,
there
yeah.
were some sunspots that disrupted power. I don't know.
It'll be something like that. But you're right. If your business, or and in many cases, half of your life becomes dependent upon 24/7 connectivity to the grid, to the power grid, which powers all of your internet access, you can't have that just randomly go down. You can't say, well, not only is it at night, we had a big storm, therefore everything we had to turn everything off. It's like not acceptable. You can't, that is not going to be something that's going to be okay going forward, which is why 3 Mile Island is being brought back online. Microsoft needed the power, and it was less expensive to bring an existing nuclear power plant back online than to build a new one. And so that was good enough. And you do that because the power is an absolute requirement. It's non-optional. You got to have a ton of it, and it's got to be uninterrupted power. And that's at this point, that's not going to be green. Now, if AI solves that problem for itself, that's good, but we're not there yet. So we need legacy power production to make sure we stay online
Well,
at
you
this
mentioned
point.
3 Mile Island, and it's the same issue there is affecting gas producers, natural gas producers.
Ah,
Currently, there's a massive move for merger and acquisition with companies gathering up producers and transmission
right,
lines, pipeline
right.
companies,
Yep,
because that natural gas is a reliable, inexpensive source of fuel to generate electricity. This
exactly.
the walking away from fossil fuels was a pie in the sky myth that is never going to happen in our lifetimes. These data centers rely upon power, as you just said, continuous 24/7. It cannot be interrupted. And the question is, who's going to
Right,
get it there and how can they do that reliably? So we end up with an unexpected demand for small nuclear plants and an unexpected demand for more gas generation. But actually, it's cheaper, as in the case of 3 Mile Island, to go
right,
buy gas generating companies than it is to build a new plant. So
right.
this opens the door for investment in AI related areas that most people have not taken time to think about, much less research. But they should be on the top of mind if this is an area that you are wanting to add to your portfolio, but saying, my goodness, those AI stocks, they're really expensive. Are they overvalued? Probably.
Right,
But
right now.
maybe I've
Yep.
got another cheaper way that I can participate in this long-term growth and not have to pay such a premium for the privilege to invest capital for a growing industry, an industry that's not going
Sure.
away anytime soon. Though
Not going.
there's rocky road along the way. There's once
And
you enter,
predicting the big winners at this point is virtually impossible. There's just no way to tell because it doesn't matter if you're NVIDIA or not. The ability for smaller firms to completely disrupt this entire sector is there all the time, and it's going to happen time and time again. So being broadly invested in technologies and multiple AI avenues is probably a better idea than trying to pick a winner right now and saying, well, this is the company that's going to own this for a while. There's just no way to tell at this point. It really is difficult. Even NVIDIA, it's like they're the safest bet right now if you just want to go pure AI because they've got the best chips today. And we'll see how that goes going forward.
however, if you owned them at the first of the year when DeepSeek came out, you would have been feeling a great deal of pain
Hello.
and
Yep.
asking yourself if you really did know what you were doing. So
Right.
it takes a lot of research on your own
Right.
and a commitment to do you want to be in this segment of the marketplace and being able to park that aside and say, this is my long term starting point in this business, in this arena.
Sure.
All sectors go through rotation. That's not going to change anytime soon. You need a
Yep.
way to process the data. Markets are dynamic. Our portfolio management system is dynamic and responds to current returns in the market. If you want help with your portfolio, just have questions. You want to talk about it, you can give us a call. Feel free to reach out either by phone or email. Thanks for being with us. Subscribe to our podcast. We have more coming up in the near future. Have a great day.